They fit the kids going on messy. Everybody talk about Puff Daddy.
All right, welcome back, y'all. We are done. We are done. We've just wrapped up probably about 20 to 25 minutes ago. Welcome, everybody. If you're new here, I am Queen Sheba. I am live from the federal courtroom here in the southern district of New York. And listen, y'all just literally missed the family. Let me see. The family just like the kids are here. Everybody's here today. I'm going to make this really, really quick. And if you're just joining us, you can actually get in on the replay. Most people that I've spoken with today, we've all come, I mean, there's a general consensus that the prosecution did a great job today. The government did a really good job of simplifying their direct ask and instruction of the jury. They broke down the law, what it includes, what it does not have to entail. And I'm going to have to say this. Many believe that this was not a good day for Diddy. This was not a good day for Diddy. So some of you are hard of hearing. So let me break it down. When you hear people say this is not a good day for Diddy, please don't confuse that with the possible outcome of the trial. They're just speaking in real time, including myself. When we say this is not a good day, that means the government did the damn thing. Now, up next, first thing in the morning, is Mark Agnafilio. Honey, I'm going to be here. They said Mark does marvels. He does wonders with the jewelry. He's actually, we nicknamed him the magician. So Mark is going to perform his magic in the morning, and I am going to be here for it. If you want to send me coffee, send me a strong cup of coffee, honey. Now let's get into it. So what the part I came back in is after I went live, they did take a break, they did go to lunch, and the government wrapped up with focusing on interstate transportation for prostitution. And they focused on the payments that were directly sent to the escorts, and they focused to the escorts, focusing on Clayton, Howard, and Jules. Jules was one of the favorites. Jules was often used many times by Diddy, and they showed as an exhibit to the jury that Diddy used his American Express card to pay Clayton, and they could prove that by showing the amount, and over the amount was $3,000. Okay. Then they also focused on interstate transportation for prostitution, the flights that the male escorts would take. They focused on Cabral. They said that Diddy had become so personable, he and Jane Doe had become so personable with Cabral that they actually nicknamed him ATL. A great portion of Cabral's transportation originated from ATL, and either he would be flown to Miami, New York, LA, and or Florida over a number of years, okay? And they said, you know what? if you're not sure about what we're saying, let us give you a very specific example. Don't get it twisted. This was indeed interstate transportation for prostitution because in one of the text messages, they highlighted to the jury that Diddy had contacted Jules, I do believe, last minute. And it was so last minute that Diddy said to Jules, listen, I know it's last minute, but the tip will be worth your while and the tip will be reflective of the inconvenience that we've posed. And they established the enterprise, right? The RICO, the racketeering of it all with the interstate transportation for prostitution by highlighting that Jessica Ruiz was the travel agent that would book these flights and book, arrange transportation. They also highlighted that Jane Doe would also arrange transportation and would be reimbursed by Diddy under the Combs Enterprise and sometimes Diddy himself. Listen, Diddy, they showed Diddy himself reaching out to some of the escorts to get their full name, date of birth, so that he could book their flights. Huge mistake. Why would you do that? Anywho, um, so then they used an example of another male escort by the name of Paul Author. Paul, his last name is Author. Author. So Paul was an escort. Very interesting story about Paul. Paul started off as an escort and he worked his way through the Combs Enterprise. He was actually promoted to the role of a personal trainer. Y'all hear me? Paul started off as an escort and actually became personal trainer to Diddy. Okay. And they used an example of where Paul was transported to Turks and Caicos. And they highlighted that evidence via text. And Diddy was speaking directly to Paul. And it was Jane Doe. And she said, how do you want me to handle your payment? And Jane Doe followed up after the freak off with Paul, and she said, I'm so sorry that we had to go 24 hours straight with no break. Now, look, I thought I was a bad mamma jamma with my husband. But when they read that text where Jane is saying, I'm sorry, here's your payment. We went 24 hours straight with no break, nonstop. Okay. So the government shifts to a different message from Jane Doe to highlight coercion. And the message was actually from Diddy. And what does it say? They referred to the payment that Diddy was talking about. And oh, no, they did. I'm getting my notes mixed up. So they go back and they want to highlight you remember the time Jane Doe had three men in a hotel room and it was for her birthday? And this is like probably, this is one of those moments where would refer to as going off grid, and she actually went off grid, and this is her first time doing three men, right? Let me give you the names if I haven't before. The three men that the government highlighted for the jury that was actually involved in those free costs, they were Paul, Reggie, and Cabral. Cabral is from ATL. Paul is the escort turned trainer. Now, this is my first time hearing about Reggie, or I probably was not here. But they only wanted to focus on Reggie because, watch this. This is why I'm so confused as to why there are not more people on trial for this. Because Diddy reached out to the modeling agency that provides the escorts slash prostitutes for the free costs, and he had a concern because he wanted Reggie, but the lady from the modeling agency, and I'm calling a thing, modeling agencies, many of them in Los Angeles are actually fronts for prostitution rings. So imagine that when these little kids are being signed to some of these agencies, these young adults, these young men and women that are being signed to these agencies that's actually grooming these people to become escorts and prostitutes. And I said what I said. How come these entities and these corporations are not on trial? Nonetheless, let me get back on topic. So Diddy reaches out. He's talking to Bridget about this guy named Reggie. And according to the government, um, the lady from the modeling agency, she responds that Reggie actually has a client right now. He has a client that day, to which the response from the defendant was, oh my gosh, I'm a big concern. He's already busy with a client. He may be too tired, and we don't want to run into a tired situation. Give me 1 second because it is so windy out here, and I don't want my tripod. Bye. Have a good day, y'all. I don't want my tripod to fall over. Give me 1 second, y'all. Work with me. Hold on. We got to make sure. This New York weather, boy, I tell you. Okay, here we go. I'm back. Give me 1 second. Okay, thank you for your patience. So Diddy was concerned, and he's communicating his concern to the lady, the broker, the agent at the modeling agency. He's like, wait a minute, if Reggie already has a client tonight, I'm concerned that he's going to be too tired to perform. And listen, the lady tells Diddy, Reggie is never too tired to perform. After she said that, the government showed the jury where Diddy wired $15,000 to that modeling agency. Okay, then they talked about a point because remember, so they're still focused on the interstate transportation for prostitution, but in order to make this all make sense, they have to give very good examples to the jury. And then they wanted to direct the jury's attention to an incident where Diddy, whom they call the defendant sometimes, direct Jane Doe, directs her to come to the hotel. And they're calling this coercion because this is one instance where Jane clearly states in a text message, right? I'm giving you all the facts. I'm not coming to New York. I'm upset with you. I'm not coming. Um, and they said when Diddy worked his magic, and at first she made up her mind, I don't want to do any more freak offs. I'm tired of this. I'm not coming for whatever reason. He gets her on the phone. He gets KK to get her on the phone. When he's done with her, he texts to KK, okay, we're good to go. And they're using this as an example of coercion. They're also using this as an example to establish that, listen, these women have attempted to tell him many times they didn't want to come, but he would coerce them to come. And with this example that they gave, they said, Diddy told Jane that he had a surprise for her. And the mention of a surprise encouraged her to go ahead and do the freak off against her will. And at that point, Jane leaned in into the situation and started to book Cabral's flights and her flights and everything else. All right. So they're trying or attempting to tie this into transportation for prostitution. And then they say they wanted us to keep in mind, as the jury or the jurors, to keep in mind that there's different elements of this, right, for racketeering. Number one, to persuade, induce the victim to travel with the intent of prostitution. And I made a note at this point. They are going to, if they haven't already, I have a strong feeling. Listen, they leaned in heavily on KK. And I wrote a note. They want to indict KK. They actually named KK and D-Rock as co-conspirators of the enterprise, and they have named all three of them as the core three, the inner circle. They are coming for KK. It's just a matter of time. And I'm just telling you what's happening in the courtroom, okay? So then they pointed out to the jury, listen, and that's why I say they're probably going to indict her because they're pointing out to the jury, it doesn't matter what the defense said. It doesn't matter if KK is here or not. They said she set up travel. Not only did she set up travel, she's aware of what's going on with these free costs. And she also set up travel for Wild King Night in Vegas. Then they play this audio of Diddy telling KK, listen, I want the sexiest, the most unapologetic wild night in Vegas. And KK responds to Diddy, highlighted by the government, is Paul coming? So the government's take is, listen, she directly asked him if Paul is coming. And you want to know why? Because that tells you she's aware of the parties, the key players that need to be in the room when Mr. Combs says, I want the wildest, sexiest night for Vegas. KK respond, is Paul coming? Meaning, should I get Paul? Who do you want there? They go on and they talk about, they talk about KK facilitating travel, that she knows what's going on. Another example that they use as it relates to the racketeering, the coercion, that they told the jury, instructed the jury, you only need two incidents. Even if you don't believe anything else we've said today, you only need to believe two things we've said or two counts that we're presenting to you in order to find him guilty. Let's continue. They later talked about forced labor, and they highlighted three elements that they highlighted three elements that they're focused on. Um, that the defendant has to have a goal of obtaining labor of an individual. That's the first one. The second element is serious harm and or force by threats, intimidation, restraint. And number three, that is this an established pattern of behavior that would cause serious harm, and it doesn't have to be bodily harm. It can be mental harm, it could be financial harm, it could be well-being harm, any type of harm, but it doesn't necessarily have to be focused on physical. All right, so they continue with the forced labor, and it says, you're talking to the jury, right? No money has to be exchanged. There is no pay required for you to find him guilty of this act. It could be mental labor. It could be laborers, right? But they did a really good job of telling them what the law is and what it's not, what it requires and what it does not require. They utilized Cassie and Jane Doe, and they said, listen, Cassie and Jane Doe were forced into labor by Diddy. Listen to me very closely. They gave really good examples because they highlighted the grueling hours of how long the freak offs lasted. They said, watch this. Now, initially, I don't know about you, but I was under the impression that Jane Doe had the longest freak offs. No, ma'am. It actually wasn't Jane Doe. It was Cassie, according to the evidence today. They said that Cassie testified that her free calls could last anywhere minimum from 36 to 72 hours, and the longest free call that Cassie ever participated in was 4 days. Jane Doe, according to the government, testified that her free calls would last anywhere from 24 to 48 hours, and the longest free call that Jane Doe ever did lasted I think maybe 60 hours. Close. Don't quote me on that one. I can't find my exact note. But here's the part where they talk about forced labor. They reminded the jury that neither of these women were allowed to sleep during these grueling sexual cycles of freak offs. And they said not only this, drugs were introduced. These women were in a drug induced state, and they had to have sex with multiple men for days and hours at a time. Now, here's why I say this is a really good argument. If you look at the legality of it, hold on, because this wind is tearing my behind up. Give me 1 second, y'all. This is the part where I think Diddy's going to do some time. When you think about forced labor, what they started to say was this was very painful for the women because these women would have to stay in these sexual, see, you're probably just thinking sex, right? But the government reminded the jury it wasn't just sex. They had to remain in these uncomfortable sexual positions that Diddy liked. Now, this isn't my testimony, y'all. I'm telling you what's being shared. They said that Jane Doe and Cassie had to remain in whatever sexual position he would like for hours. So much so that Jane Doe to this day has back problems. And they began to get into the medical. They said that both Jane Doe and Cassie contracted infections, UTIs, sores, and that the sex became so painful because even when they had UTIs, they could not skip freak offs, and that the burning sensation was unbearable, and the antibiotics stopped working. So listen, that was a great example to tie into forced labor and the racketeering of it all. That's an excellent example because you do need powerful, powerful examples. You need to tell the jury somebody was sick, somebody contracted UTIs, there were sores, and not just sores in the mouth, but sores on the body from being on your hands and knees and not allowed to be able to be moved. Now, these are not my words. These are the words of the government. Let's continue. Even I was like, oh my God, that's a lot. So then they go on and highlight that this is definitely an example of force to cause serious bodily harm, right? And this is very, after a while, it went from being fun to painful. And that's what they're talking about: coercion, forced labor, sex trafficking, because it was no longer fun for the ladies. So when you start making somebody do a freak off when they have the UTI, yeast infections, or anything like that, that's forced labor because there's not a mutual benefit that's exclusive to both parties, and only one party is gaining a benefit from that. Do y'all understand that from a psychological perspective? All right, let's continue. The third act is, did he act willingly? Because, I'm sorry, the third element that they're wanting to highlight to the jury is that the defendant would have to have acted knowingly and willingly. And they said, yes, he did, because he kept pushing them in the freak offs when they couldn't go anymore, when they were tired. They said he would say, don't quit on me now. Finish strong. Come on, we got one more round. You can push out one more round. Let's finish on a high note. Come on, baby, don't quit on me. And they said weeks of life were lost for both Jane and Cassie, because they would have to spend weeks recuperating, right? This is what the government is arguing. Listen, it wouldn't like you just go back to regular life. They would have to spend weeks recuperating, not just resting, but there's burning sensations down there. They have sores over their body, sores in their mouth, sores in other area, right? Back pain, excruciating muscular pain, cramps. Listen, and when I say cramps, when your body starts to cramp up and things like that. Then they talked about Mia being forced to labor for Diddy, and they highlighted the fact that when she first started working for Diddy, she was making 50K. She was elevated to 100,000 a year, and the longest that Mia ever had to work for Diddy was 5 days. I'm sorry, the longest time that Mia went without any sleep was 5 days. 5 days no sleep. I must have missed that part earlier, you know, the last couple of weeks. But there was one time Mia had to work 5 days straight without being allowed to go to sleep. Um, they also highlighted forced labor because when they're saying that when Cassie was not around, that Diddy would actually utilize Mia as a sex slave, and that Mia had to provide sexual benefit to Diddy when his roster or his top three was not around. And although they're saying that Cassie did not know about it, it's still considered forced labor. It's still considered sex trafficking, because you have to think about the imbalance of power with him being her employer. And one thing that they reminded them that one thing Mia testified under oath is Diddy is the kind of man that you cannot say no to. And they went back and they focused on the testimony of the clinical forensic psychologist, Dr. Don Haynes, and they reminded them that, listen, I know Mia's testimony was a little choppy, right? However, remember what Dr. Hughes, not Haynes. Remember what Dr. Haynes said. Or is it Dr. Haynes? Yo, I've been here too long. Hold on. Hold on. Wait a minute. Remember what Dr. Hughes told y'all, that sometimes victims may have memory gaps. Sometimes their memory may lack detail, and it doesn't mean that they're lying, or it doesn't mean that a sex act or sexual abuse did not occur. Um, Basically, that was it. They used Capricorn as an example of forced labor, with her being taken to that abandoned building day after day after day for the course of 5 days. What else did we talk about? Um, they reminded the jury at the end about the venue, and they said, we want you, we want to talk about the venue, and we want you to take note that all five of these counts, at least one count occurred in the Southern District of New York, and the act does not have to be criminal. The defendant doesn't have to be necessary. I'm sorry, the defendant doesn't have to be present for a criminal act to be established, and or basically they're just saying, listen, if you're having trouble trying to decide if Diddy needed to be present for it to be considered criminal, no, he doesn't. If it's anybody that worked for him, anybody that's directly and or indirectly related to him, and something criminal happened, you can charge him with that. Then they go on and they give another example. And at this point, I was like, okay, you were doing a good job. Now you're kind of leaning too much into the complexity of the law. They wrapped it up after that. That's all we have today. The government rests their case, their closing argument against Sean Diddy Combs. Um, very, very technical second part of the day. Hold on. And it's looking like he may get some time, but we have not heard the defense give their closing arguments. So we're going to be back tomorrow and we're going to see what they have. But what are your thoughts? What do you think? Let me check out some of these comments and then we're going to wrap up. It's a lot. It's been a long day. It's been a long day, honey. Listen, hold on. Give me 1 second. Thank you, Byron Holman, for the $5 super sticker. You said, after this, will rich men dating broke women be considered sex trafficking? This is going to set a new precedent. You know what I'm saying? For dating. We have to see what they find him guilty of. Morbid Sunshine, thank you for the $5 super chat. I appreciate you. Listen, y'all, it's been a really long day. Lots of hard work. Let me tell y'all bye. I'm going to go. I will see y'all a little bit later and see you tomorrow. So take it to the chat. What are your thoughts? Do you feel like the government did a really good job of establishing their case with the jury? And what are you hoping for tomorrow when the defense takes the stand or when the defense takes the lead in presenting their closing arguments to the jury? Take it to the chat. What are your thoughts?